This is the Ascension Overhaul, otherwise known as the hardest mod for Batman Arkham City ever made. Now, after attempting the Nightfall Overhaul, which is Arkham Asylum's version of this difficulty mod, I thought it'd be fun to jump right back in and try it out for Arkham City as well, especially because the mod just received an update from its creator GP Unity that makes it even more challenging than before. Of course, every enemy you now face has massively enhanced strength to deal so much damage to Batman, increased attack speeds giving you very little time to counter before getting hit, and much smarter AI in Predator sections that will make it next to impossible to avoid getting seen. Bosses apparently possess a much greater challenge now thanks to the mod because they are a lot more aggressive than usual, which we'll talk about in further detail later on into the video as we make it to each boss battle. The skill tree has been completely reworked. If you remember back to my Arkham Asylum run, I decided to add a self-imposed restriction of no armor upgrades just to make things a bit more interesting and that much harder on myself, but we can't even do that for Arkham City's difficulty mod because armor upgrades for Batman don't even exist anymore. They, alongside some of Bruce's other overpowered upgrades like the multi-ground takedown and the Batclaw disarm, have been completely removed from the game altogether. Now, the mod makes even more difficulty changes and enemy tweaks that it doesn't tell you about on top of everything else, which means we're pretty much going in blind and we'll have to discover some of this stuff the hard way as we make our way through this challenge run. To somewhat balance all of these modifications though, you'll notice that Batman also has increased speeds as well, from things like walking, grappling around, and even some of his attacks being much faster than they are in the base game. This isn't necessarily meant to buff the player per se, but rather force you to play at the same quick pace as every other enemy and react much faster to everything going on around you now. Basically, thanks to the mod, it is extremely hard to avoid getting hit in combat, Predator, essentially all aspects of gameplay, and if you do take damage, you pretty much die instantly. Much like my Arkham Asylum run though, I still feel like I have to add some sort of self-imposed restriction to make my run through the Ascension Overhaul that much more painful, and considering the fact that armor upgrades are already off the table, I've decided to remove any and all upgrades whatsoever. Yep, Batman's skill tree is completely off limits to me throughout this entire run. No Bat Swarm ability, no critical strikes for combat, no gadget improvements, no nothing. So with all of that out of the way, can we beat Batman Arkham City's hardest difficulty mod without any upgrades? Well, let's find out. Right after we mention this video's sponsor, Ekster. In the spirit of their massive Christmas sale going on now, Ekster recently sent me their Parliament wallet to try out for myself. Now the wallet is super slim, about half the size of a traditional wallet, but it still can hold up to 12 cards and cash without problem. It's made from environmentally certified, premium leather material, is super compact to carry around with you, and has extremely good accessibility. Just push in the little button right here at the corner of the wallet, and all your cards pop right out for easy access just like that. I mean, from how the card holder looks to how it feels in your hand, everything is just so high quality. Another product I received was Ekster's Finder card. This little guy is super small, about the size of a normal credit card, and all you have to do is charge him up once every 4 months, connect it to the Apple Find My app, and then put it anywhere inside your card holder so you don't have to worry about losing your wallet since you'll know exactly where it is at all times. So what are you waiting for? Like I said, Ekster's currently having a Christmas sale going on now, so click on the link below and use my special code KNERD to get up to 55% off. Thank you so much to Ekster for sponsoring today's video. Alright, booting up the game, and much like the Nightfall Overhaul for Arkham Asylum, there's already a ton of noticeable differences now thanks to the mod. For starters, not only are saves labeled as the Ascension campaign, but there's also 3 new difficulty levels to choose from. Regular, which is just the base game with a moderate challenge added, Insane, where enemies are relentless and require careful strategy through and through, and Chaos, which doesn't really have a description, more so just a warning. What if I told you that there's actually a 4th difficulty though? You see, since Arkham City has a New Game Plus, the mod actually makes sure to enhance that game mode as well, where if you beat the game on Insane or Chaos like I did heading into this video, you unlock Ascension Plus. It's the hardest difficulty level out of the 4, and of course still comes along with the usual stuff such as no counter icons in combat, higher leveled enemies earlier on into the game, you get the idea. Obviously, there's also the fact that you get gadgets and upgrades right from the get-go as well, but since I've completely restricted myself from getting any and all upgrades anyways, that won't help me very much now, will it? So starting up a new Ascension Plus save, we go through a quick round of combat as Catwoman that sort of gives us our first taste of what's to come, get bullied by Strange and his Tiger Guards as Bruce Wayne, and once we're thrown into Arkham City, the run finally begins. Now, right off the bat, we of course have this little combat encounter against Penguin's men before actually turning into Batman, which is meant to be nothing more than a short little tutorial, right? Well, with the difficulty mod installed, I was literally having trouble already, where I messed up an evade and got hit once, got punched again almost immediately after, and just like that, I was down to 1 HP. Regardless, I focused up and survived the early scare, but this is a perfect example of how every situation throughout Arkham City needs to be approached with caution now. If you go in with a lowered guard like I did, you're going to get punished for it, and with how fast enemies can punch and how much damage they can do to you, yeah, you have to always be on your toes. Also, the fact that I'm already so close to dying in an area that is designed to be nothing more than a short little tutorial, probably the easiest encounter I'll face throughout this entire run, definitely means I need to put the death counter on screen so we can keep track of how many times I die in the future. Anyways, after knocking out Penguin, climbing up Ace Chemicals, and then putting the batsuit on, we can finally head over to the courthouse to rescue Catwoman from Two-Face. On our way over there though, normally you can just glide over all of these enemies on the street without being seen, right? Well, with the difficulty mod installed,
it's the best!
Yeah, every thug has a much larger vision now because of the mod, making it a whole lot harder to avoid getting spotted. It's not a problem just yet, since it doesn't really matter if I get seen in a situation like this, but can you imagine what full-on Predator encounters are going to look like later on into the game, where it's next to impossible to avoid detection and stealth, and if I do get spotted, I'm basically a one-tap? We don't have too long to ponder on that though, because after heading into the courthouse, we take out the gunman up top with a silent takedown, drop down to the floor level, and begin another combat fight that's normally very easy, but once again I barely scrape by with 1 HP because I'm still getting used to the much faster pace of combat between both Batman's moveset and enemies punching really quick now. Basically, imagine playing the game at 200% game speed. That's essentially what it feels like. Nevertheless, we get through it, so after defeating Two-Face and saving Catwoman, we're off to the church in search of the Joker. Now, of course, all that's here for us at the church is a quick chat with Harley Quinn, and then a brief intro to stealth missions, which is obviously very easy to get through since all of this is just a scripted encounter. So once we clear the room and save the hostages, we can make our way up to the top of the church to scan the gun Joker used to shoot at Catwoman, track his radio signal to find where he's at, and then head straight into Joker's Funland. Alright, the steel mill section of the game was definitely the first actual difficult area through and through, and even though I've had a couple of hiccups early on because of the mod, I'd argue that this is where the challenge truly begins. I mean, once we do a little parkour to actually get into the building itself, we're immediately thrown into our largest combat encounter thus far, and it was here where I realized that batarangs will literally be my best friend throughout the entire rest of this run. You see, normal punching isn't very optimal in this challenge considering that every time I punch, it's a major risk. Enemies can get in hits at a ridiculously fast speed now, much faster than my punches, so that leaves me open to take a ton of damage whenever I'm stuck in an attack animation. Not only are they risky, but punches aren't even all that helpful in combat because every single enemy has increased health now thanks to the mod, and of course I don't have access to upgrades, so no critical strikes, meaning my punches are doing next to nothing. On the other hand though, attacks like beatdowns and ground takedowns not only finish off a thug instantly so I don't have to worry about their increased health, but both of these moves have actually been buffed because their animations are a lot faster than usual to match the quick pace of combat. I'm sure you're wondering though, where do the batarangs come in? Well, since batarangs are extremely quick to throw, by far my fastest attack, it means far less risk for me taking damage whenever I use them. I can also throw up to 3 at a time without losing my combo for some insane crowd control like knocking over hordes of thugs, which definitely helps prevent me from getting swarmed or overwhelmed, particularly useful for getting in those beatdowns or ground takedowns. So yeah, lots of batarangs will definitely be my go-to strategy in combat moving forward, especially when we start facing rooms with a lot more enemies and harder enemy types like stun batons. So once we clear this combat fight, we can make our way over to our first real Predator encounter in order to save the doctor that's being held hostage. And guess what? We're already facing an armored thug and Predator because, yep, we're playing on Ascension Plus. Now with that said, he's not really an issue here. Thanks to the fact that the wreck gun immediately sends armored guys flying through the air, I can just use that to knock over the 2 enemies here, get in a quick ground takedown before backclawing this thug over the ledge, and after a few more ground takedowns, there's only 2 dudes left trapped inside of this tiny little room and at the mercy of my smoke bomb. Seemed pretty easy, even with the insane difficulty mod installed, right? Trust me though, Predator will get a lot harder later down the line. With the stealth room cleared though, we can head back to Joker's Joker's office, only to be met with our first mini-boss of the game, Mr. Hammer. Now, Mr. Hammer here doesn't really have any major differences to him, but because of the mod and my own self-imposed rules, I did have to handle this fight with an alternate approach than you would normally. You see, usually it's perfectly fine to just mash punch on him, every so often mixing in a bat swarm or an evade to avoid the basic enemy's attacks. Well, I don't have upgrades, so no bat swarm, and if I try to just punch, evade, it's very risky because not only are the thugs very hard to react to due to their massive attack speed increase like I've been saying, but them not having counter icons makes it that much more difficult. So that leaves us with one other viable strategy, directed aerial attacks. If you use an aerial attack and then midway through aim your joystick at Mr. Hammer while hitting the punch button, you'll be able to land on him for some really good damage. This is also by far the safest way to take him out since you can't get hit while you're midair, so I was able to just repeatedly use this attack over and over until he was completely knocked out with little to no issue. From then on, it's just a regular combat encounter, grapple up to the office, and once Joker sneaks up and surprises us from behind, we've officially entered Catwoman's second DLC chapter. Okay, so originally, I wasn't even gonna bring up Catwoman's DLC missions at all. I even purchased every one of her upgrades, breaking my own rules because I was planning to just go through the Catwoman parts as fast as possible to get on with the run. However, the mod actually made these sections a lot more difficult than I was expecting, so just ignore the whole upgrades part, okay? Getting to Catwoman's apartment, grabbing her stuff, and then heading to Poison Ivy's lair was all no issue. Where the real challenge comes in is Ivy's boss fight here, mainly because the combat is way more difficult than it is normally while playing as Batman. So what makes Catwoman's combat so much harder than Batman's? Well, you see, unlike Bruce, Catwoman wasn't really given any sort of speed increase to her moveset whatsoever. Therefore, not only am I playing with no counter icons and have to react really quickly to everything going on around me thanks to the mod, but I'm also not even playing at the same pace as the thugs. All of my own attacks are a second or two behind. It sure doesn't help that Catwoman also has some really long punching animations to begin with. Sometimes she'll punch fast, sure, but other times she'll whip out some weird swirly-twirly kick like this that takes forever. In the base game, this ends up working out fine, but since we're playing with a mod that increases enemy attack speeds immensely, it pretty much gives the now very quick thugs easy hits while you're stuck in these long, drawn-out attack animations. And it's not just punching. Like I said, Catwoman's beatdowns, ground takedowns, and everything else hasn't been adjusted to fit the faster pace of combat, and her quickest move, the bolas, is a complete joke compared to the batarang. I mean, thugs literally hit faster than it takes you to just simply throw them. Since it only takes a few punches to completely kill you, under all of these circumstances, I ended up dying not once, not twice, but 3 entire times here. Yep. 3 deaths to the death counter. On my 4th attempt, I literally just played so extremely passively to the point where I was basically spamming evade the whole time, waiting for only the perfect opportunities to get in hits, and what do you know, it worked. I absolutely hate playing the game like that, but it is what it is. I wasn't about to die a 4th time this early on into the run. So with Poison Ivy's boss fight beaten and done, we can finally switch away from Catwoman and go back to playing as Batman, where we have to now head to the old GCPD building in search of Mr. Freeze. Of course, Penguin's men are already there though, so we can easily skip past the outside group of thugs by luring them away from the front door, heading inside, and then easily taking out the inside group of men because there's only 5 guys here to begin with, and one of them literally just gives up without even fighting back. Yeah, despite the whole Ascension Plus and no upgrades, stealth hasn't been much of an issue so far, but like I said though, just trust me, Predator will get a lot harder when the rooms get more congested with enemies, so the effects of the difficulty mod, like the massively increased vision, are actually impactful. Side note, but I really just want to take a second to highlight how fast Batman can walk now from the mod. It's just so funny. Anyways, now that we learned Penguin is holding Mr. Freeze, we can make our way over to Park Row and finally begin the entire museum section of the story. Now, the whole museum part of Arkham City was where this difficulty mod takes a major step up in intensity and truly starts living up to its name. Obviously, our first objective is to take out all of the jammers so we can actually gain access to the museum itself, and this jump in difficulty is noticeable right from the start. Up until now, I had always been able to survive after getting hit twice, albeit leaving me with just 1 HP, but now, as the enemies progressively get more and more difficult as we continue through the campaign, just 2 hits from the most basic thugs is enough to completely finish me off. Yeah, considering how fast these thugs are swinging punches at me now as well, barely even giving me a split second to react with no counter icons whatsoever, everything could be going great, and then you blink and I'm already lying there dead somehow. Just goes to show how you can never really let your guard down while playing through the Ascension Overhaul, even in fights like these that are normally brain dead easy. So yes, I did die once at the very first jammer, but I was able to take out the jammer on my second try, make my way over to the next jammer, only to randomly get sniped out of nowhere while traversing. Yep, this is the first time, but definitely not the last, that the thug's insanely massive vision from the mod has actually caused me to take damage in an area where you would normally not get spotted at all, but thankfully it wasn't enough to kill me here, and I was even able to clear the second jammer with what little health I had left. So that just leaves us with the third and final jammer, where we have to head underground into the subway for another predator battle. Normally, you can grapple up to this ledge without issue and do a quick ledge takedown to begin the encounter, right? Well, I tried doing that exact same strategy with the difficulty mod, and I somehow got seen, making this 2 times in a row where I've fallen victim to the modded enemy vision. Once again though, I was able to narrowly escape with my life, and from then on I played this entire encounter really carefully since I had next to no health and was out of smoke bombs, meaning I was guaranteed to die if I ever got spotted. So, playing really slow, I was able to take out everybody one by one and eventually clear the whole room. You know what that means? We can take out the last jammer, head back up above ground, and start making our way through the museum, where I didn't run into any trouble until reaching Penguin's gladiator pit. Now, since I knew that this fight following the cutscene was going to be our hardest encounter so far into the challenge, I came prepared. Using a pretty popular speedrunning strategy, I was actually able to grapple cancel and glide into the gladiator pit instead of just running, which gave me just enough time to place down some explosive gel. Immediately after, we have a quick chat with Penguin, begin the fight, and remember that explosive gel? Well, we can actually use it to blow up almost every single thug that's entering the arena. Too bad that we don't have the multi-ground takedown to take out all of these guys, huh? Regardless, it was really nice to get that head start and create some breathing room to build up a combo while the majority of the thugs were still on the ground and not a threat at the moment. That's certainly not the last time I used explosive gel in this fight though, because I actually found that the quickfire version is extremely good for crowd control, an absolute necessity with the difficulty mod installed. Pairing both my batarangs and quickfire explosive gel, especially in such a large combat encounter like this, is crucial to avoid being overwhelmed, because once you're surrounded by a ton of thugs, particularly on Ascension Plus when they can attack at the speed of light and it's extremely hard to tell when they're even attacking to begin with, that's when things get really tricky and you start getting hit. Now, everything was going good to start off and I was playing great, but after making just 2 mistakes, my health bar was already in the red, leaving me as a 1-tap with the majority of the thugs still up and fighting. Now, I just want to emphasize to everybody just how difficult massive combat encounters like this actually are in this challenge. In these huge fights, there is no quick way for me to take out hordes of enemies. Like I said, no multi-ground takedown because the mod removes that from the game entirely. I of course restricted myself from any and all upgrades anyways, so nothing like critical strikes to speed up combat either. And combine that with the fact that these thugs have all been buffed with significantly increased health, yeah, I basically just have to sit there for really extended periods of time going back and forth with my fists until the thugs finally take enough damage to start getting knocked out, all while playing perfectly for that entire time and not letting up for but a moment, or else I'll probably end up dead in an instant like we've seen previously. Luckily for me, I did play perfect to close out the encounter, and I barely survived part 1 of the fight. In preparation for the next round that was soon to come though, before clearing the room, I made sure to pre-place another round of explosive gel in this exact spot, which will once again come in very handy. You see, as soon as the fight is over, Penguin drops a giant container from the roof, and inside of it is none other than a Titan. Now, since I already placed explosive gel though, as soon as the cutscene ends and the combat begins, we can actually just detonate it to stun the Titan immediately without worrying about one of his charge attacks or having to ultra cape stun him. So after 1 round of riding the Titan and then getting thrown off, I decided that my best bet to stun him again would be to still use some surgical explosive gel and then play it extremely carefully while doing the beatdown, where I would just get in 1 punch, evade, get in another punch, evade again. You get the idea. Apparently though, the mod makes these thugs attack so fast now that even my very cautious strategy still had me getting hit. Despite those few fluky hits though, it worked for the most part, and after going through 1 more round of riding the Titan and then having a bit of a scare where I'm not too sure what happened, I barely survived and the Titan was defeated. Alright, and that is the gladiator pit officially cleared with no deaths whatsoever. I know I died 3 times at the Catwoman section, but even then I still think that this combat encounter was leagues harder than anything I'd done so far into the challenge. So with that over, we can now move on to the water room to save some of the undercover cops, after a bit more experimenting with the weird new walking speed changes from the mod that I'm still getting used to, and we eventually make it to a predator encounter. Remember how I've been saying that the mod will make stealth a lot harder as we progress through the game? Yeah, here's where that starts coming into play. On my first attempt, I played extremely patiently. I waited for about a minute just grappling around the gargoyles until someone finally separated themselves far enough from the group that I felt was more than enough space to get in an easy takedown, only for some dude to snipe me from the opposite side of the room with a shotgun. I narrowly escaped though, waited long enough for the enemies to get out of aggro, but then when I tried to grapple up to the gargoyle, literally the same thug spotted me out of nowhere and killed me instantly. Yep, that's the difficulty mod at work. Alright, next attempt. This time I tried to start off the encounter by immediately taking care of the armored thug by backclawing him over the ledge, but he freaking blocked it. Yeah. A new ability that these guys have now thanks to the mod is the fact that they're impossible to pull over railings, which is usually the best and easiest way to take care of them in a non-modded playthrough. I unfortunately found out that they had this ability the hard way, and in the process I alerted everybody to my position where I couldn't escape their massive vision before I was already dead again. Nice. Okay, so third attempt. This time I decided to target the non-armored thug with my backclaw to pull him over the railing instead, which actually worked, and immediately dodged behind the cover to avoid detection. This alerted everybody but one guy to the door area, leaving just this straggler on the lower floor who was so far out of vision that there's no way even the modded enemies could see me from here. Easy takedown. Fast forward a bit, I kind of used this display case to my advantage to take out two more goons, preemptively place some explosive gel on the floor for later, and then drop down to take out this enemy all by himself. With that said, all that's left is one last guy who I knew was making his way to get a hostage for himself, hence the explosive gel, and he was left at the mercy of my detonation button, and after one final ground takedown, the predator encounter was finally over. We do have to add two more deaths to the counter, but honestly, with how this room is constructed so openly with very little safe spots, especially with how well that pairs with the thug's modded vision, it could have been a lot more if I wasn't careful. So with that side of the museum cleared, we can make our way to the opposite side now and go fight the other one-handed brute, Sickle. I mean, there's really no reason not to tackle this guy the same way as his brother, so all I did was spam directed aerial attacks while constantly using my rec gun on the two armored thugs for easy crowd control, and we've officially defeated Sickle just like that. Now we can let Mr. Freeze out, head back over to get the disruptor from his suit, and confront Penguin, only to end up face to face with Solomon Grundy. Okay, our first real boss fight of the game. Now, something the difficulty overhaul mod claims to do is to rework bosses so they're more aggressive and harder overall, so this should be fun, right? Well, I'm gonna be honest, this was the first time in the entire challenge that I didn't really notice that much of a change. It definitely did seem like Grundy was doing his jump attack a lot more, which could be him being more aggressive, but that move is still easily dodgeable, and even if you were to get hit, Grundy does far less damage than even the most basic thugs. So yeah, the boss fight was a bit disappointing, I can't lie, and I was able to get through it just as fast as I would normally playing the base game, meaning after we take out Grundy, we can beat down Penguin, find out that we need a sample of Ra's al Ghul's blood to create a cure for Joker's Titan poisoning, and then move on to tracking the assassin that escaped the display case all the way back to Ra's lair. Now, while tracking the ninja, there wasn't really anything too noteworthy. I did run into some fairly difficult encounters while following her through the sewers, and some not so difficult, but it was nothing that a couple of beatdowns and a huge amount of batterings couldn't handle. That is, until we reached this Predator map. Everything was going great. I had a couple thugs already taken out, the armored dude was frozen and couldn't do anything, but after I used a remote battering to launch this guy off a ledge, another enemy saw me on the gargoyle. I tried to escape by getting out of view, but I got stuck in the climb up animation and ended up dying. Add it to the counter. Alright, the next time around, I just said screw stealth because at this point I was going to get seen anyways even if I tried my best to avoid their vision, so I immediately launched this armored thug down the elevator shaft with my rec, and then proceeded to simply run around, batteringing everybody followed by ground takedowns, all the way until the room was cleared, which somehow worked better than actual stealth? Hey, I'm not complaining. So after defeating those Joker goons, we can rescue the doctor and then reach Wonder City, where the real challenge begins after confronting our first ninjas. thugs. Now the ninja enemy type is already a lot more tricky than basic thugs on New Game Plus because they obviously have 2 different attacks and no icons to indicate which is which. Combine that with the fact that their already fast attack speed has been increased even more, yeah, it's really hard to differentiate which attack they're going for at the moment. However, in these early stages before we have to fight absolute hordes of them, I found that it wasn't even really worth it to try and counter because you either get the counter, which does next to nothing to their buffed up health bar thanks to the mod, or you get the dodge, and since I can't unlock the blade dodge takedown as an upgrade, yeah, there's really no point. On the other hand though, since ninjas are quote unquote harder than normal enemies, there's typically a lot less of them in these fights, meaning beatdowns were a ton easier to get in and certainly much more efficient to take these guys out, at least in these early stages while there's still so few of them. So after we gain access to the secret entrance by scanning all of the guardians, talk to Talia and go through each stage of the demon trials, and tell Raish that we aren't actually here to kill him, but just want some of his blood, he uses the Lazarus Pit and we've now officially arrived at the Raish Al Ghul boss battle. Alright, the first stage of Raish's boss is of course just a bunch of ninjas in a combat encounter. Now look, remember what I said about ninjas being much harder than regular thugs? Well, here they're no different, and there's not really less of them either to even that out. I mean, I knew they attacked fast with their swords before, but it felt like every time I tried to make a move and play some offense in this encounter, I was completely getting outpaced and would end up getting counterattacked by one of their blades. It sure didn't help that my batarangs, the best form of crowd control that I've been using throughout this run, don't even work on these enemies. On the contrary, if I strictly stick to defense, remember, I can't do any damage. If I had access to blade dodge takedowns, it'd be a different story, but having counters as my only form of damage doesn't really do much to these modded enemies. So after getting destroyed 2 times in a row, once dying here and the second time barely getting past it at such low health that I was practically done for in the second stage, on my 3rd attempt I realized that I needed to do something to create some space so I could get in some of my own attacks without getting completely surrounded and overwhelmed. How did I do this without batarangs? Well, I started the encounter by placing some explosive gel. Now this gel was very helpful for some much needed crowd control, and it spaced out the ninjas just enough to where I was able to sneak in a quick beatdown on the first guy. Getting a combo started was the hardest part. Now that I have much more mobility and an easy out in the special combo takedown if I ever need some iframes, it wasn't too complicated to get through the first stage unscathed. You know what that means? Time for stage 2, Giant Raish. Now, the first thing to note about Giant Raish is that his health bar doesn't actually go down if you hit him with the rec gun. You know, the only way to deal damage to him? Well, no, it's not what you think. The rec still does deal damage to him. This is simply a side effect of the Ascension Overhaul. You see, the mod actually increases Raish's health to the point where it goes beyond the viewable health bar in game, therefore completely breaking it visually, which means he'll take a lot more hits to defeat now. Regardless, outside of his health bar increase, I once again didn't have too much trouble with this boss or notice him being much more aggressive than he is in the base game as the mod claims. It was extremely easy to just play normally, and even with him taking more hits to defeat, I didn't find it very difficult to get past stage 2, which means we can move on to the 3rd stage, another and much larger combat fight against the ninjas. Now this encounter is obviously a lot more crowded than the first fight where I was already getting overwhelmed, so I needed to be smarter about this one and actually create some sort of strategy to handle all of these guys at once. So after Raish does his dash move and you dodge him, I found that it was best to target the ninja who immediately takes his place with a beatdown. Not only is this ninja typically far enough away from the group because of the dash for me to get an entire beatdown, but it also meant I could build up my combo for a special combo takedown to use when Raish begins another attack, which makes me invisible for the entire duration of the dash. Then of course I could just rinse and repeat with the beatdown, get in a few attacks while waiting for Raish to show himself, special combo takedown to prevent the dash, so on and so forth. It wasn't as simple as that for sure. The ninjas definitely did put up a good fight and I had to work around being crowded by tons of really fast enemies at all times, but I'm not gonna lie, I played really well and built up a massive combo even without critical strikes. I did unfortunately mess up at the end and lose it though, but by that point there were so few ninjas left that it wasn't really an issue. If anything, this combo I strewed out really just goes to show how many hits these enemies can tank before they start dying with the difficulty mod installed. Normally in New Game Plus with critical strikes active, it usually actually only takes around a 60 times combo to beat this entire encounter, but here I was with more than double that and I still hadn't finished the fight. Once again, I just want to emphasize the huge difficulty jump in this challenge from base New Game Plus, because to go that long against ninjas that can attack at the speed of light and absolutely shred your health bar if you ever get touched, yeah, it's definitely not easy. You know what is easy though? The fourth and final stage of the boss fight. Once again, even with the difficulty mod and my self-imposed no upgrades, nothing really changes for Giant Reish outside of the obvious he has more health now. Basically, just run around dodging every attack, shooting Rex when you can, and although I did mess up at the end, it wasn't nearly enough to kill me, and with one more Rex shot, Reish was finally defeated. I'm kinda mixed on this boss. On one hand, the Giant Reish sections obviously didn't feel all that challenging from the mod, but on the other hand, the other sections I felt were some of the hardest combat encounters I've ever faced. Overall, I think the two sides of Reish's battle definitely balanced each other out, and the extra challenge thanks to the mod was definitely a lot of fun. We don't have too long to dwell on this boss though, because Batman is dying. So after leaving Wonder City with Ra's al Ghul's blood sample and making our way back up to ground level, it's not long before we run into yet another stealth encounter at the subway station on our way there. I started by taking this guy out with a silent takedown, and then immediately tried to get this other thug with my back claw, but it actually retargeted off of him last second, meaning I don't get the knockout, and every enemy in the room has been alerted and knows where I am. So after dropping a quick smoke bomb, I was finally able to get the back claw in on this thug, and the two armored guys were set up perfectly for me to wreck them off of the rail car, only to run into a mine while I was trying to get away, blowing myself up. Nice. Yeah, pretty much everything went wrong for me here. On my next attempt, I did the exact same thing. Silent take down this first thug, and then backclaw this dude over the ledge, which thankfully worked this time around, allowing me to freeze the thug by the doorway and disarm the remaining two threats with an easy wreck shot on this generator. It sure wasn't pretty because I again had to find out the hard way that the mod gives armored thugs even more new abilities, where in the base game you can just backclaw and run into them to knock them over, but here they can completely block that move, which is something the mod description happened to leave out, but nevertheless I survived and we can move on. Shortly after, we run into this massive combat encounter with a bunch of goons who are all decked out with gear and equipment. It was here where I really started to notice just how limited my moveset is with no upgrades at this stage of the game. I was using the same 5 attacks over and over for minutes on end while chipping away at all of these buffed up thugs. Once again, it sure wasn't pretty, but my strategy of batarangs and explosive gel for crowd control while using frequent beatdowns and special combo takedowns to get in damage got the job done. Alright, next up, saving Quincy Sharp from a bunch of gunmen after he was just thrown into Arkham City, interrogating him to learn more info about Hugo Strange, and then we're off to the old GCPD building to meet Freeze and manufacture the cure. Except, as soon as the cure is made, Mr. Freeze decides to turn on us, meaning we're launched right into our next boss fight. Now right off the bat, I am so used to just tanking this first shot from Freeze so that I can use this generator for damage as fast as possible, but I guess I forgot I had the difficulty mod installed or something, because just that one shot alone was enough to take out over half of my health bar before the fight had even really started. I was quick to notice another change to Mr. Freeze's boss fight thanks to the mod as well, because as soon as I had done my first beatdown on him and was prepping some explosive gel, I turned on my detective mode to blow him up, and my signal was jammed almost immediately. In regular New Game Plus, you can usually have detective mode on for around 12 to 15 seconds at a time before Mr. Freeze deactivates it for the rest of the fight, but in Ascension Plus, I literally had just turned it on, and the next thing you know, my signal's jammed. So yep, the fight's only just begun, and I already have next to no health and can't use detective vision. Great. Regardless, I was still able to use the explosive gel for a second beatdown, get some of the basic takedowns out of the way early for some more damage, and then went to just spamming drop attacks before he could freeze the top of this ledge area. After pulling this off twice though, Freeze actually saw me up there the third time, shot me down, and things really went downhill from there until I was eventually killed where he spotted me from all the way across the room. Yes, we do have to add another death to the counter, but I think this one was worth it because now I sort of have a grip on what changes the mod creates to make Mr. Freeze harder, as well as how I need to approach him differently and more cautiously in this challenge. So obviously, to start off, I made sure not to get hit by Mr. Freeze's little grenade thing here this time around, using the disruptor instead, which is a lot safer, and then using the wreck immediately after. I sort of followed the same path and attack variations that I had done in the previous attempt, just making sure if I used detective vision, it was only for a split second so that Freeze couldn't jam it in time, and from then on, the boss battle was honestly pretty smooth sailing. I did have some little hiccups at the end end where Freeze somehow damaged me with his back completely turned, and again a bit later where he predicted I was up on the railing, and these definitely had me worried because of how much damage he does now and the fact that I was at 1 HP, but in the end, all that was left was for me to do one last line launch and Freeze was officially defeated. I think the hardest part of this boss fight was simply not knowing what to expect going into the battle. In my first attempt, having things like my health bar absolutely implode before even starting the fight, or having my detective vision just get jammed immediately definitely came as a shock initially, sure, but after that it was fairly straightforward once I got a hold of how to approach Freeze. It's basically just the same stuff you would do normally, just with a bit of added caution to account for the changes made from the mod. So with Mr. Freeze defeated, we found out the cure was stolen by Harley, meaning we can leave the old GCPD, save Vicky Vale from the snipers, and make our way over to the industrial district and back to Joker's Funland. Now obviously, Joker has buffed up security a lot since we've been gone, meaning there are snipers and gunmen literally everywhere now. Since all of these thugs have that increased vision from the mod, yeah, I was not taking any chances. I made my way along the outer edge of the district where there was zero chance I was going to get spotted. Okay, so once we clear the armed goons blocking the heat exchange's entrance, our only way in since the furnace was generating too much heat, we can make our way into the steel mill itself. Now this section of the game overall, with no upgrades and the difficulty mod installed, was definitely very difficult. There's a lot of smaller combat encounters as you make your way through the steel mill, but honestly, at this point in the run I felt like I'd fully adjusted to the new speed changes, as well as how to work crowd control when needed, which is pretty much all the time with this mod, I'm not gonna lie, and I wasn't really having any complications. Predator on the other hand though, was still giving me a lot of trouble. After I talked to the doctor that we saved here earlier, she tells us that there's going to be another stealth encounter with armed gunmen just beyond these doors, as well as the fact that they have mines. Mines have already been a thing since we're playing on Ascension Plus, but you get the idea. So entering the room, I immediately took out this thug that's all by himself, grappled up to a gargoyle, and once all of the other thugs were alerted to his body, I tried the wreck to knock them all over, smoke bomb, and then glide down to get some free knockouts, but some dude not even in my vision sniped me out of nowhere, killing me before I could even reach my smoke. Okay, another death. I think the reason these Predator maps are so difficult now is because you don't know what you can and can't pull off anymore in stealth. Much like backclawing armored thugs over ledges, normally this is a move you definitely would be able to do in the base game, but with the mod installed, instead it gets Batman spotted and killed, and yeah, really the only way to actually know stuff like that is by learning from it after you try it out for yourself, which will likely mean you'll end up dying like me at least once. Well, learn from it I did, because on my next attempt I still took out the same thug to start off, but immediately after, I placed explosive gel all over the ladder and extinguisher so that I wouldn't have to leave my vantage point to still get a knockout. When the enemies tried to climb up the ladder, I detonated both gels, resulting in a massive explosion that KO'd one guy and left the other super disoriented in the smoke. I was then able to get another free knockout on this armored thug with a quick wreck, took out one more using a batarang on this fire extinguisher and then going in for the ground takedown, and then it's just cleaning up the last few remaining stragglers without much issue at all. Now that we've gone through the stealth section though, we can keep moving forward until eventually reaching these snipers who are absolutely tweaking out, and once they're taken care of, we can finally get to the end of the section. Joker's boss fight. Okay, one of, if not the hardest combat encounters in the entire challenge. The start of the fight isn't so bad. It's just a regular combat encounter with the addition of the amusement carts, which is perfect for building up a combo until the mini-bosses drop in. Speaking of mini-bosses, as soon as Mr. Hammer comes in, I went back to the same good old strategy I've been using on him and his brother throughout this entire run, spamming directed aerial attacks until he's defeated because that's a much safer option than trying to beat down him when I don't have access to upgrades like Bat Swarm. Or at least I thought it was safe, because when I was locked in the animation, this random knife guy was somehow able to stab me with his final hit. I thought this was certainly a fluke since I hadn't had any trouble avoiding damage with this strategy up until this point, but a few directed aerial attacks later, I literally died to thin air and my game crashed right after somehow. Alright, second attempt. This one can't possibly go any worse than the first one, right? Wrong, it definitely can. At the very beginning of the fight, before Mr. Hammer had even joined in, I tried to counter here, but the thugs just punch so fast now, it's really hard to time it right, and the literal basic thugs now do enough damage to leave my health bar in the red with a single hit, by the way. So knowing I'm about to die and considering what just happened, I tried to counter earlier this time around, only for this to happen. Alright, third attempt. Now I know it hadn't worked out too great for me in the last try, but I still thought that the directed aerial attack was my best best bet to take out Mr. Hammer before the Titan was able to join in on the fight. Well, much like my first attempt, it didn't go too well, because even when I was flying through the air or in the middle of my attack animations, thugs were still getting hits on me. Yeah, the directed aerial attack strat may have been fine for the earlier combat fights where there was still less enemies overall, but just wasn't going to work on Mr. Hammer in such a crowded, late game combat encounter like this one, I guess. So I just said screw it. You know what? I guess I'll just have to deal with Mr. Hammer and the Titan attacking me all at the same time then. On my fourth attempt, I ended up choosing to just strictly target the regular thugs while ignoring Mr. Hammer so I could take out as many basic enemies as possible before the Titan dropped in, so that way I hopefully wouldn't be so overwhelmed and have to do a ton of crowd control while trying to deal with 2 different mini-bosses attacking me at once. Lo and behold, the new strat actually worked really well. With the combined forces of the train carts and Mr. Hammer constantly hitting his own guys while swinging at me, I was actually kind of mowing through these enemies, even despite their increased health from the mod and obviously no critical strikes. In fact, around half the enemies were already knocked out before the Titan had even joined in on the battle, which will definitely make the mini-bosses a lot easier to deal with. But we can't keep ignoring Mr. Hammer though, and since beatdowns and now directed aerial attacks both seem to not be safe options in taking him out, how are we gonna eventually defeat him? Well, that's where the Titan comes in. You see, since I already cleared a lot of the room and wasn't getting super overwhelmed, that opened up me being able to stun the Titan with explosive gel, get some punches in on him, and then go for a ride. While I'm on the Titan, Mr. Hammer obviously can't damage me, but I can damage him. It definitely was a bit tricky to actually get the Titan stunned and then attack him enough to be able to climb onto his back, because I obviously still had the other mini-boss and the remaining basic thugs trying to interrupt me with their very fast attacks, but I was able to do it, and after 2 rounds of Titan riding, Mr. Hammer was a one-tap for me to easily knock out, quickly freeze Joker so they can't interrupt my third and final beatdown, and once the Titan is defeated too, one last kick to Joker's face and the boss fight is over. Wow, like I said, not only this fight, but also the entire steel mill section as well was sort of a moment of realization just how weak and underpowered my Batman is, especially at this stage of the game, without upgrades and with the difficulty mod installed making everybody else much stronger. It's not just the fact that one hit will leave me in the red, or how much slower most of my attacks are compared to the enemies, but Batman is just so useless that I was literally having to rely on the bad guys attacking each other instead of me doing the damage myself, whether it be me having to use the Titan to clear the rest of the room at the end, or at the beginning of the fight when Mr. Hammer and the train carts were literally taking out more of their own guys than I was. Unfortunately for me, it's not going to get any easier from here on out though, because after Joker blows up the ceiling on top of us and he leaves with Talia for immortality, we switch to Catwoman again, who still happens to be even weaker than Batman in this challenge. To start Catwoman's third chapter, we of course have to make our way from Poison Ivy's lair all the way back to the entrance to Strange's vault, and once we make our way through the sewers, we need to pickpocket 3 key cards from the Tiger Guards in order to gain access to the vault itself. The problem? This is an extremely small and compact Predator room and is already hard to avoid being seen in the base game, but now combine that with the difficulty mod giving all of these gunmen increased vision, yeah, it's next to impossible to not get seen. The first 2 guards are very easy to pickpocket from because they're off on their own. The third key on the other hand is a lot more tricky because all of these guys are grouped together. These main 2 Tiger Guards guarding the door are both no-goes because their extra vision would no doubt get me spotted if I tried to pickpocket one of them, leaving this guy as my only option. Normally it's pretty simple, just wait for him to enter this room, drop down, and then pickpocket him while he's out of range. Unfortunately, I tried that same strategy and the thugs can now see you from this position thanks to the difficulty mod, meaning I have to restart. Okay, second attempt, I ended up trying somewhat the same strategy because I figured that it was still my safest bet to get his key while he was all alone inside of this little room, except I decided to drop down further away this time and just crawl behind him because dropping down was what had gotten me seen the last time. Well, I guess the thugs have such increased vision that they're still alerted even when I drop down from all the way over here. Another death added to the counter. So, since using the ceiling clearly wasn't gonna work, on my third attempt I opted to just wait for the Tiger Guard to make his way behind these boxes where I could slide under and get behind him without being seen. I did have a little scare at the end.
Got something.
But thankfully they weren't fully alerted. So with all 3 key cards, we can open the vault and then start actually knocking these guards out. Now in this encounter I had to be really careful because we've already seen how deadly doing something as small as just dropping down from the ceiling can be. With that said, I was able to take out this first guy with a silent takedown without being spotted, and once everybody was alerted to his position, I tried to get a quick snipe in just to take out one of the armored thugs. It didn't really go as planned though because another enemy came out of nowhere, but thankfully I survived where I was able to quickly run over over and get this guy who is venturing off alone, leaving just 2 more thugs who I easily knocked out with a few quick takedowns. Now all that's left is another combat encounter that we make quick work of despite the difficulty I had previously with Selina's combat, and with that, we've beaten Catwoman's 3rd DLC chapter. Thankfully that's over, and no, we aren't doing the 4th one because that's after the main campaign anyways, so after we go back to save Batman at the steel mill, we're officially done with Catwoman and we now have to stop Hugo Strange in Protocol 10. Oh boy, where to start with this section? How about at the very beginning, where it's normally super easy to just scan 6 helicopters until finding the master control program so you can gain access to Wonder Tower, right? Well, what if I told you that the freaking helicopters have also received a massive vision increase thanks to the difficulty mod, meaning Batman gets spotted all the time. Literally right off the bat, I got seen by this guy who started shooting at me after I scanned him, so I tried to hide down in the sewers, and after waiting a bit for him to lose sight and just talking with these thugs, the helicopter somehow saw me all the way down here, retargeted, and left me with 1 HP, which was definitely not good for when I happened to get seen again a bit later, killing me instantly. In the base game, it's pretty uncommon for you to even get spotted by the helicopters in the first place, and even if you do, worst case scenario you can just tank their hits, but clearly with the difficulty mod installed, neither of those are an option, so on my next attempt I was a lot more careful and made sure I wasn't seen. With that part done though, we can now make our way to Wonder Tower and then gain access, where after having a chat with Hugo Strange, we quickly run into an extremely large combat encounter, one of the hardest yet, against a horde of Tiger Guards. With that said, I'm not even gonna lie, I had practically mastered the faster timings and strategies of combat at this point and was just going ham on these enemies. The combined power of my quickfire gadgets like explosive gel for large groups, wreck for armored enemies, and batarangs for everybody else was easy crowd control, followed up by lots of beatdowns and special combo takedowns for the actual knockouts themselves. Yeah, no upgrades whatsoever while fighting against buffed up, modded enemies. It doesn't matter, they didn't stand a chance. You know who does stand a chance though? The gunman in the very next stealth encounter right after this. Now upon entering the Predator room, you can choose to talk to the doctor that we saved here earlier, which I did end up doing because I usually prefer getting footage like this just in case I want to use it in the video. And well, I did end up using it in the video.
They came down and started killing everyone. It was a bloodbath.
Yep, that's the modded thug vision for ya. What's weird is the enemies didn't even say anything as if they'd been alerted. They just started shooting out of nowhere, and considering that I was not expecting to be bombarded by bullets in an area where you're normally safe and sound, it definitely made me jump out of my seat a little. Anyways, add it to the counter. So in my next attempt, I obviously made sure to avoid talking to the doctor entirely and just head straight into the Predator encounter. Now first things first, since this is probably our largest stealth section thus far with a ton of sniper enemies patrolling the ledges, I wanted to prioritize gaining access to my detective vision ASAP so I would know where everybody is. You know, because I'm an instant one tap if I happen to get seen now, even with a full health bar, and avoiding detection is already hard enough. So I dropped down to silently take out the first jammer, who is luckily all by himself. The other jammer was going to be a lot trickier though, mostly because he's an armored thug and is grouped up. To deal with this, I threw a smoke bomb on top of the jammer, wrecked, and then glided down to knock him out, and even though this was definitely risky, I ended up making it out okay. Now that I had access to detective mode though, the rest of the room was very straightforward. All I had to do was play extremely patiently and wait for enemies to split themselves up. So following that, I got a handful of easy inverted takedowns without being seen, wrecked this dude over the ledge for another quick knockout, and with 2 guys left, all I had to do was freeze one of them so he couldn't interfere, and then take them both down without issue. You know, considering that this Predator room usually gives me the most trouble out of all of them in a lot of my challenge runs, to beat it without dying, unless you count whatever this is, I'd say is certainly a big win. It's not the last stealth encounter we still have to go through though, because after we take the elevator up, go through another round of combat, and climb to the top of Wonder Tower, there's even more gunmen, including a ton of buffed up, modded armored guys for us to take out before getting to Strange. Now obviously this room has a very unorthodox design, and considering the enemy's field of view increase, I didn't even really want to risk trying to play vision in such a tight area, especially with Strange also looking for me. So as soon as I took out the first guy, I immediately headed outside to the gargoyles. From here, I was able to snipe off another Tiger Guard who was on the balcony, which was really good for me because it alerted multiple armored enemies to his location, drawing them out of Wonder Tower as well. From here, all it took was a wreck shot to knock both of them over like bowling pins, and after a quick smoke bomb to avoid getting shot here, I was able to knock out both armored guys with back-to-back ground takedowns. Now all that's left is 2 more enemies, so after a bit of cleanup work to finish off the remaining guys, we've cleared the room, can confront Strange, and after this whole sequence with Ra's al Ghul, Protocol Protocol 11, and jumping out of Wonder Tower, Joker immediately tells us to come to Monarch Theater where he's holding Talia hostage, and we can move on to the finale of the game. Now, getting inside of the movie theater wasn't any harder than normal. Even though the snipers have better vision, it didn't really impact this section at all, meaning we can knock out all of the gunmen and head inside without any trouble whatsoever. Once we're inside though, Talia gets shot, where we go through the whole healthy Joker is actually Clayface plot twist, and with that, we've now officially reached Clayface's boss fight. So a lot like the Ra's al Ghul boss fight, Clayface has a significant health increase, which we know because he also has the bugged out health bar that Giant Ra's had as well, since yeah, his modded health scales beyond the in-game bar we can actually see. Also a lot like Ra's al Ghul's boss fight though, outside of that one difficulty adjustment, I didn't really feel like Clayface himself was that much harder outside of the health increase. Sure, he did feel more aggressive, but the reality is that he still uses the same easy to dodge moves over and over again, and even if you do get hit, Clayface doesn't do much damage, much less than even the most basic thugs. Apparently this is because GP Unity had trouble making damage changes to some of the actual bosses themselves when creating this mod, so with that said, we can just keep spamming freeze blasts at Clayface like nobody's business, and even though it felt like he took around twice as many freeze blasts to defeat as usual, we got through stage 1. Now stage 2 isn't really all that different to be honest, so once again, the result was inevitable, it just took a long time and a ton of freeze blasts to eventually get there. You know what that means? On to the third and final stage, Batman with a sword, which also happens to be by far the most difficult part of this boss fight. Why is it the hardest part? Well, you see, the clay drones in this section happen to do so much more damage than Clayface himself, which I had to find out the hard way when I mistimed a double counter, and yeah, I got insta-killed. So after adding yet another death to the death counter and going through Clayface's very long first 2 stages once again because he is very tanky now, I was back at the third and final stage. Now this time around, everything was going pretty smooth. I was building up combos, I was mowing through the clay drones, I was hitting Clayface with freeze blasts, at least until I got hit once, leaving my health bar in the red and turning me into a one-tap. With that said, I did not want to die a second time this close to the finish line, so I just started playing extremely carefully. Probably the most careful I had been in this entire challenge run, constantly evading over all of the enemies until I found an opening to attack. I'd get in a quick hit, keep dodging, find an opening again, all the way until I was able to build a high enough combo for a special combo takedown, which would finally be enough to make Clayface pop his head back up. After doing this twice, Clayface popped up for a final time, and one more freeze blast later, the boss fight was over, and I'd officially beaten Arkham City's hardest difficulty mod on Ascension Plus with no upgrades to Batman's moveset whatsoever. Yeah, I find it really funny how he managed to end the challenge run with 20 deaths in total, literally the exact same death count we had in Arkham Asylum's version of this mod, but this is definitely a win because I was only playing without armor upgrades in that run. Here I didn't have any upgrades at all. Overall, I thought the mod was a ton of fun. There were certainly a few parts, mostly just some of the boss fight stages, that I felt weren't all that much of a difficulty jump, but other than those few moments, the Ascension Overhaul was genuinely pretty tricky through and through. Of course, like I've been talking about, we've already beaten Arkham Asylum with the difficulty mod installed, but GP Unity recently released a difficulty mod for Arkham Origins as well, the Vengeance Overhaul, and he's currently working on one for Night 2, so we'll be playing through both of those to finish the series sometime in the future. If you want to try this mod out for yourself, the link's in the description box down below. Like the video if you enjoyed, leave a comment to help me out on the YouTube algorithm, and of course, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later.